Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I am here to facilitate with our host, Peter Scalzo, for another episode. So, welcome, Peter.
Hey, Sean. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good.
So, we're sticking with the wall. This wall.
Yes.
It's such a big concept for us, and I think it's describes a cancer journey, and so we're sticking with that. And we've been in the middle of kind of looking at emotionally healthy spiritualities. Wall. I'm going to call them day by days. They call them daily offices. And so we're gonna touch another one today. So you ready for this?
Yeah, I'm all set.
'Cause I'm gonna see if I can pry something out of you. I don't know, some way.
Maybe.
But in this one here, there's a Henry Nouwen quote. So I just want to start with the Henry Nouwen quote, and then we'll dive in off of it. And it says, "The way of the Christian leader is not the way of upward mobility, in which our world has invested so much, but the way of downward mobility, ending on the cross. Powerlessness and humility in the spiritual life do not refer to people who have no spine, who let everyone make decisions for them. They refer to people who are so deeply in love with Jesus, they are ready to follow him wherever he guides them, always trusting that with him they will find life and find it abundantly." So, interesting quote from Henry, because it seems so counter to where we would hear most spiritual messages. It's about uplift and a journey of ascent. He's describing a journey of descent.
Yeah.
How does that strike you when you first hear it?
Well, I know it to be true now, but not a great feeling. Whenever we talk about descent, which for me in my cancer journey would mean a journey into brokenness, physically, but also emotionally.
Yeah.
And in this case, for me, spiritually, which would be to recognize my powerlessness, because I think that's what he's really talking about there, which is quite a message. You know?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this, and I was trying to think. It's like this has been a massive shift in my thinking and my own journey from this, and I think some of it. There's a shift, and then there's also a recognition that there's a paradox that is written into this here, and that I think there is both a journey of descent and a journey of ascent that's happening at the same time, and that's the paradox that we're wrestling with a little bit. Maybe go back. When did you recognize that this journey of descent was important for your journey in the cancer space? What did it look like? How did you get to a point where you were willing to accept a journey of descent as opposed to ascent?
Okay, so for my journey, it would be the initial 10 years, the first 10 years were surgical solutions. That's how I would phrase it. So I would really be not a descent so much. There was part of that. They were difficult surgeries at times, but not like life-threatening, not basically taking my feet out from under me. I was still able to sort of walk through it and still have language that sounded like the journey of ascent.
So I'm going to put a word around this because you said it a second ago. So you hadn't got to powerlessness yet.
Yes.
So
correct.
you're really tying powerlessness in a big way to the journey of descent.
And I think I was in a powerless state physically. Like I recognized that this cancer is something that could take my life, but it wasn't in that camp yet, in that space of actually taking my life. So I recognized that I didn't have power over my physical body and the cancer, but I certainly emotionally and spiritually thought I'm still in a high place kind of thing.
You didn't have a posture of powerlessness, because I think there's something
that's good. Posture.
There's a reality that we don't always know, but I like the Dallas Willard statement is like reality is what you run into when you find out you're wrong. So there's reality that you that was there that doesn't change no matter what you say or feel about it. But then there's this posture that you were at, and so your posture changed as you move from a state of feeling like there were things that you could control to coming to an understanding of powerlessness.
Yeah, I mean, so that I like that posture thing. But yes, it was in 2015, 10 years after my initial diagnosis, that place where I found myself, and I've talked about it a lot. And the reason why is because it was a game changer for me. It was a complete shift in my life, to the degree that all of a sudden I was dealing with metastatic cancer, which had a 5% survival rate. All of a sudden I was staring at my mortality in the face, and I had a huge recovery to go through, to actually work hard at. Recovery for me is really hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a place at that point, I had crashed emotionally and spiritually. And we read through my journal, which displays that. And so I could not control my emotions anymore. I ended up in a place of fear, anger, and sadness, severe fear, severe worry, darkness all around, sadness for sure, anger also, and I couldn't control those emotions.
Mm.
And I didn't know what to do with those emotions because I had always suppressed them before. And so then I had to do something, and that's why it was so monumental that I was delivered that journal, empty journal, and I was able to write, because writing helps me to express what I'm feeling. So getting that out on paper was huge, but also my spiritual powerlessness. I felt like I couldn't connect with God at that point. I felt like the connection had been somehow severed, or at least minimized.
Right.
So I felt powerless in that area too. So it went from just physical powerlessness to I'm facing death. So that's a complete powerlessness, right? Physically, but then emotionally and spiritually also. And I would add intellectually, but I guess that might be part of the other ones too. So,
yeah, this is, so I'm going to take it a step further now. So you went from power to powerlessness, and the first part of this this office, they call them daily offices in the EHS, started out with this passage where Peter denies Jesus, and before his crucifixion, and then on the back side of it, Jesus comes for restoration, and he asks Peter to feed his sheep, and as he goes on, he does that 3 times, and it really shows, that Jesus knew that he was denied, but then in the very last part of it, he says to Peter, now I'm going to ask you to be led to a place where you do not want to go. Mm-hmm. And this part of the journey was a willingness for Peter to go where he did not want to. He would be dressed, and he would be, and really what Jesus was doing was foretelling Peter's own death that was going to come. It was, and that's why now when I think speaks to being led to the cross, his own cross, and was Peter willing to go to a place he did not want to go? And so I want to go back to your journey. Is you got to a place of powerlessness. Did you get to a place where you recognized you were being led to a place that you didn't want to go, but there was a willingness to go? And what causes that change? What is that? Because that to me is the wall, right? In the big way.
Yeah. I mean, I was not willing to go to my passing, to my death. I was not in a place where I could accept that at all. So it was being thrust upon me, it was being forced on me. And meanwhile, all these emotions were bubbling up that I didn't know how to deal with. And, as I processed those emotions and processed what was happening to me, I started to cling to God's promises, to what he was speaking.
Yeah.
Because it was like, hold on, my ship here is adrift, and the storm is pushing it all over the place. I have no anchor.
So I want to challenge a bit, and then to see, and this isn't is what you said makes sense to me. And then I was thinking back of your hardest journey, and you got to a place where you said, I want to be taken. I don't want to go through this. I do not want to go forward. And so I would have expected to hear you say where you didn't want to go was through continued suffering on this journey at the level. And so it would have been better to be taken in your mind. That's the kind of things you were communicating for at least a window of time. And so is that and maybe I'm not trying to parse your words, but I'm actually really curious about is the thing I most want to avoid is more suffering.
Yeah.
And the types of suffering and continued long suffering. And so here you are, you're in your 20 year, you're working on your 21st year of your cancer journey, and the ask has been keep going in the suffering. And in one sense, you described almost like we all had this biological desire for life. And our bodies we're designed for survival instinct. And yet in your journey, you have this story about not wanting to survive any longer because the suffering was so great. And maybe talk through that a little bit, because I kind of feel like from an outsider's view, but I'm interested in your interpretation of this. That was a major point in your turning. It's like, hey, you didn't control whether you're going to continue to suffer and how long the journey could be. And you started putting, through the journal, and in one sense, a form of putting one foot after the other each day. And you found that God was there along that journey, even though it was really, really dark.
Yeah. My thought process at the time was, Peter, you've got to figure out, or you have to surrender, submit, do something to figure out a way how to navigate this recovery. Even if you're going to pass in the hospital, you're in such a low place, such a depressed state, that even if you were to pass a couple of weeks from now, whatever it is, you have to figure out a way to navigate yourself to that place. Because even physically, when I had, again, that 14-inch incision vertically in my abdomen, and it's really difficult to actually recover from that. There's tubes everywhere. I can't eat, there's all, and I don't even feel like getting up and moving and walking, but that's a key to actually recovering in these things. So I didn't even want to do that. I was depleted. I think that, I think about all of the disciples, the apostles, except for John on the Isle of Patmos, who were martyred. And not just Peter's death, but all of them. And I'm thinking, this scenario at Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan violated all those beliefs and visions and dreams that I had for my life. It was a huge, violent interruption of all that.
You can totally identify with Peter being led to a place you didn't want to go. Because, this is a place you do not want to.
No way.
You haven't wanted to live out of a cancer journey. You haven't wanted to live out of the suffering and appointments and just the
remember,
continued.
Yeah, in 2017, the second time when my doctors, there was cancer all throughout the region, and they said, just go home and call hospice. And at one point, there's a big softball-sized tumor in my neobladder, and that had only happened like 3 times for this Sloan doctor that had done the original surgery. And so my doctor, he's brainstorming. He's an aggressive surgeon, and he's like, how about we remove your entire urinary system, kind of thing, like the ureters, everything that was there, and I guess somehow hook up to a bag somewhere. And I just did a timeout with my hands, and I just said, I am not willing to go through any more major surgeries. And I haven't had a major surgery since. I've had a lot of procedures and surgical procedures. I'm over 50 of them, but I haven't had a major abdominal month in the hospital surgery since my 2015.
So would you say
surgery.
That was, in a sense, accepting your lot, that, hey, whatever God wants to do with this journey is fine, but it's a point where you're saying, I don't need to strive anymore. I accept whatever the outcome of this is, even if it means
correct. Like okay, I appreciate you medical folks, but your oath or whatever you take is to do anything to. And I'm like, I'm not in that camp. That's why lots of times when I'm doing an end of life process with a cancer patient and they get to the point where they're like, I'm done, and they're at peace with that medically, I completely understand.
This is the part I think in this wall discussion, and really I think the heart of what we were trying to, like, if you have cancer and then there's the question, well, this has been allowed to happen to me. It's probably not your fault that you have this cancer, and you're get to the point of, and you're recognizing there's a descent, and you see this passage where Jesus is telling explicitly Peter, where you're being led to is a place of suffering. And at the same time, it's the place of descent that I want you to go on a journey. And what's interesting about this whole story is, prior to Jesus' crucifixion, prior to his world blowing up in a sense, Peter wasn't willing to go on a journey of descent. He had always thought he was on a journey of ascent. So you can just see this big transition that happens right here in this little short passage from, the transition of Peter. And Jesus was asking, are you willing to go on a journey of descent? And I think in many ways you were asked that question, and then you see God's hand. And then as you go along, it doesn't mean it hasn't been without suffering. It's been with suffering.
Yeah. And I think, like, Jesus' entire ministry, he knew exactly, of course, what was going to happen. And it was a journey of descent. Yes. It was a journey to the cross, but then resurrection. But I mean the cross. And I don't think the disciples ever really got it completely until the resurrected Jesus came to see them. But I think, he kept saying, if you want to lead, you have to be a servant.
Take up your cross and follow me.
Yes. The kingdom of heaven is for a child. You have to be like this child. So everything was just so opposite of, they were expecting this king, this warrior to ride through and to, destroy Rome. And it was this power thing they were looking for.
So for the purposes of our podcast today, how does it bring peace to know that you're being asked to go on a journey of descent?
Yeah.
And can you provide some testimony to that? Because I think that's the key of this passage is it's, hey, there's a gift here, but it's certainly a journey of descent doesn't feel like a gift. Yeah.
I'm just going to do it in an experiential way. My experience is that when I'm trying to control and manage my journey in life, I don't have very much peace at all. And when I can let go and give it over, I give everything and everyone to you, a benevolent detachment, as John Eldridge talks about. There is peace in being. That's why this higher power concept, and even for recovery, addicts dealing with their addiction, they know they're powerless over this addiction, so they have a higher power they can give it to. But having a relationship with Jesus in this journey is the game changer. Just interestingly, just to complete my part of the journey at that point, I was sent home completely convinced that I was going to do an end-of-life journey.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, like 6 months later, maybe even not that long, I was, after infusions of a brand new immunotherapy drug, which my doctor said wasn't even approved by the FDA yet, I was staring at a screen, looking at a tumor that had disappeared, hearing him say, "This is a miracle. This is God." So I was in the descent, accepting that I was going to pass. And then all of a sudden I was living.
Yeah.
Here's life again. But the perspective I got was great, difficult, but was wonderful to get that perspective of what's really important in life and yielding my will to his will.
Yeah. And I think I would highlight is, even with the tumor going away, the suffering hasn't.
No.
I think that's you're still being asked to continue this journey of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
even though you don't have a softball sized tumor
Right.
any longer. You still have the suffering. And the hard part about the journey is to recognize that that suffering isn't going to go away.
Right.
And so how do you find peace in that?
Yeah. It's a daily, God grant me the serenity to accept those things that I can't change. The courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace.
You have a different perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the thing I was most stuck out to me about this whole thing is that there's a trade-off here, and the trade-off is very similar. It's the trade-off of without suffering you can't mature to joy, that it is the pathway to maturing into real joy. And so your life is a representation of this. You've continued to suffer, but your joy has been increasing.
Yeah.
And they are inversely correlated.
Yeah.
And I think this is why we're being asked to take this pathway. The more we embrace our journey of descent towards the cross, the more we're embracing the joy of what he has for us. And so
Yeah.
I think this is such an important thing for anybody who's been diagnosed with cancer, who's on this journey. When it's written into this serenity prayer that's so famous, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. Hardship is the pathway to peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that it is the peace giver, it's the pathway, because the more hardship and the more you started out this episode talking about powerlessness, the more you embrace your powerlessness, the more you're releasing to a higher power. And as that relationship grows, your joy grows and there's real peace there. And
Yeah.
so, and your life is a testimony to that. So I think this is such a powerful
testimony to that. And I struggle every day with myself.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
my
is
own
the dream.
brokenness. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I do recovery and have accountability partners, a sponsor, all that.
Yeah. But I think it's encouraging to know that we're actually being called into, and it's not encouraging in one sense because it can come with great fear of the suffering, but then to know that this isn't without purpose, it actually has
I
such
think
deep
that
meaning attached to it.
If you've been diagnosed with cancer, my belief in my higher power tells me there is a reason. It's not just circumstance or happenstance. And my relationship with my higher power also tells me it's an invitation, as painful as it is. And
Feed
like
my
that's
sheep.
Yeah. What's that?
Well, Peter got an invitation.
Yeah,
feed my sheep.
I do love prayers for physical healing, and I believe God still heals today. And I'll put an and, not a but. And I like to emphasize, how does God want to transform me with this invitation of pain, which is a hard place to be, but can be such a prosperous place to bring about joy and peace and purpose and meaning into that journey.
Yeah. And if you juxtapose that against Solomon and Ecclesiastes,
Yes.
and the opposite is like, I took every pleasure the world had.
Yep.
Wealth, wisdom and understanding, or, great knowledge, all the sexual pleasures. He tried everything, and his exact words, it was all meaningless.
Yep.
He found it all meaningless. And so to the opposite, it's not transformative. It literally leads you to meaningless.
Yep.
And where you're saying no, suffering transformed my life, my relationships, and who I am. And so we'll talk about that some more in the wall. But I think this is such a great concept to say, hey, we know that if you're in a cancer journey, you're suffering. It's not meaningless. It's transformative. And you're being invited into something that is that shouldn't be just dismissed. I don't think I'm not trying to dismiss suffering or in any way go, hey, buck up. It's just, but it's to recognize that that suffering is coming with something that is transformative with it, that can bring peace and joy at the same time, which that's encouraging, I think, too.
Yeah. Yep.
So
thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your life. And we'll connect on another episode.
Okay.
Thanks a bunch.
Thanks.